Hey Eagle fans, it's EaglefanKarl. Welcome back to another season as we get ready to finally start the regular season and get the goofy preseason behind us with horrible football. I didn't even bother checking in for the rest of the preseason because even the third game ended up being disappointing because the starters barely played. They didn't even play past the first quarter. So it really ended up being a very disappointing preseason in terms of being able to see anything. There was some intrigue around the edges of the roster, but nothing really that was that interesting in terms of any of the roster spots and some of the position battles that were going on. I know there was a lot of talk about, Pumphrey versus Clement. But let's face it, both those guys are hardly going to play this year if they play at all. So it really becomes a moot point now as we head into the regular season. But what I want to do with this video is I want to start off by talking a little bit about the season as a whole and give sort of my season prediction. And then I'll be looking specifically at tomorrow's game against the Washington Redskins. There's not much analysis to really be done in that game because no teams have played, and it's really hard to say from last year how much of that is going to translate to this year. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the Redskins game, but I will give my prediction for that game. But let's start off by talking about the regular season as a whole and what my prediction is in terms of the Eagles' record for that season.
As I explained before, when I do these season predictions, I usually look at them in the 4-game increments, since that makes 4 quarters of the season. The first quarter of the season, I think the Eagles probably go 2-2, most likely win-loss, win-loss. Of course, if it is going to happen that way, that's the way you'd want it to happen, with the 2 wins being in division and the 2 losses being out of conference. That trip to San Diego, I think, is a tough one, especially if it would be coming off a home win against a division opponent. So that's sort of where I see the first quarter of the season. The next quarter of the season is, I think, where we have to really take advantage of the schedule. We've got 3 or 4 games at home. I think we can go 3-1 over this stretch. The one game, of course, I think is a problem is the Thursday night game against Carolina, in Carolina on the short week. But I think that we can win the other 3 games all at home, which, if that's the case, that would put us at 5-3 going at the halfway mark of the season. The next quarter of the season, once again, gets a little tricky. I think, once again, we can go 2-2 over this stretch, with winning the 2 home games and probably losing the 2 road games. That would then put us at a mark of 7-5, and really probably puts us in a position where we'd be in the position to make a playoff run for the last quarter of the season. And that's where it sort of gets really interesting, because as you look at the last quarter of the season, I think we're probably most likely to go 2-2 over this stretch as well, with wins against the Rams and the Cowboys, and losses to the Giants and Raiders. I think that Christmas night game against the Raiders probably will be the game that really determines our season. The Raiders are a tough team. I like them to win the AFC West this year, but you're going to be playing them at night, at home, on Christmas Day, so there might be a bit of a letdown for them, and that could play to our advantage. So that could be the game where we sort of steal a win, and that would get us to 10-6 if we did that. Otherwise, 9-7 is sort of where I see this team this year, and that's going to go ahead and be my prediction for the season.
So that's my prediction for the Eagles. I think they'll finish 9-7 this year, possibly get to 10-6. I looked at the division as a whole, and the division as a whole has a really rough schedule in terms of teams that we all have to play. And of course, there's only 2 games that are different for each opponent. But we all have to play the AFC West teams. We all have to play the NFC West teams. So it's really going to be, I think, a challenge for this division winner to probably have much more than 10 wins. In fact, as I went through the schedules for the teams, this is the order I came up with in terms of how I think that they'll finish. And that just shows right there the Eagles and Cowboys both at 9-7, and that's why I said I think that Raiders game really becomes real important, because if we can steal a win there, that gets us to 10-6, and I think a clear win in the division. If we're both 9-7, is the way I broke it down, the Eagles would have a slight advantage on tie breaks because of the conference schedule, but I think both of those teams probably end up going around 4-2 in the division. So that's sort of where I see this season shaking out. I think the Ezekiel Elliott suspension really sort of makes this possible that the Eagles could really win the division, because I think it's going to hurt them in games like they have against the Packers and the Redskins game that they have to play. That's right at the end of that suspension. So I think that really sort of makes things a lot more interesting for the division. If Ezekiel Elliott was playing the whole 16 games, then I think the Cowboys would probably win the division. But as a result, I think the Eagles actually have a good shot at winning this division. But like I said, at 9-7, that could easily go to 8-8 or 10-6. And that would, is the difference between making the playoffs and not making the playoffs, obviously. But as far as the Redskins game tomorrow, I do like the Eagles' chances. I think the Redskins are in for a down year this year. I really think that a lot of the turmoil that they had in the offseason is going to have a carryover effect into this coming season. They had issues with they fired their GM. They couldn't decide what they want to do with Kirk Cousins. They franchised him again. So it's sort of so they didn't want to make a long-term commitment to him, which raises questions about how much faith they really have in him. There's a complete changeover in their wide receivers as they lost Pierre Garçon and Deshaun Jackson. Terrell Pryor looks promising, but that was because he was getting a lot of catches and yards in Cleveland, where someone has to get him, and it might as well have been him because there was really nobody else that was very good there. So that's a real question mark as to how good of a wide receiver he can be when he's transitioning from a career quarterback. So those are all a bunch of questions that really sort of is a wonder for where this Redskins team is going to be, which is why I picked them as low as I did for the regular season. As a result, I think the Eagles can win this game. I think they can actually sweep the Redskins. I think that there's been a lot of talk about the fact that the Redskins have won 5 straight against the Eagles, but I think a lot of that has to do with just the way seasons have sort of shaken out. I think if we would have played them last year with Lane Johnson in both games, we probably would have won at least one of them. So I really like the Eagles' chances in this game. My prediction for a score is going to be Eagles 30, Redskins 17. Like I said, I'm not going to do an analysis of offense versus defense and yards and all that kind of stuff like I've done in the past. Probably wait till about weeks 3 or 4 to start really getting into that, until you really start to get an idea of where teams are this season. So right now it's really more on gut feeling. And that's sort of where I view the Eagles and the Redskins for tomorrow. I think the Eagles are the better team. And as a result, I'm going to go ahead and pick them to win. But let me know what you think. What's your prediction for the season record? And what's your prediction for tomorrow's game? I'll check in after the Eagles-Redskins game. Until then, fly Eagles fly.